So I wrote in my notes, Sam tries to shoot demon and missed. Yep, that's pretty great.
Alright guys, that's the episode. Tune in next week as we talk about...
Just in case you didn't know, I'm Matthew.
And I'm Brian.
And this is Road Trip Recap. Spoilers up ahead, as today we are talking about the Salvation episode of Supernatural.
We're also going to be looking at the cult and other enchanted weapons.
Cult. I always hear cult.
Cult.
It's not a cult. It's not a cult.
It's
Alright, buckle up and let's go. Our episode today starts off with our first instance of them doing the road so far with a backdrop of Carry On My Wayward Son, if you're watching it on DVD. If you watch it on Netflix, there was licensing issues, and so they use a different song, which threw me off because I was rewatching them a while back on Netflix, and it was season 4 or something before they actually started using Carry On My Wayward Son for their season finales. And I was like, I thought that happened earlier, and turns out it did, but then they changed it for digital versions. So anyways,
that would explain why I'm watching it on Netflix, and I'm just kind of hold up now.
You're like, I didn't hear Carry On My Wayward Son. Well,
I was good. I was even prepped vocally to join in, and my wife looked at me like, really?
Disappointed!
Disappointed!
We start in Blue Earth, Minnesota. We get a, pastor. He's doing his pastor thing. Some lady comes in, which we know as Meg, and, she's talking about how she's seeking forgiveness or whatever. I don't think she says she's seeking forgiveness, but, she starts listing out things that she's done.
Confessing her sins.
Yeah, and then it ends with her, slicing a man's throat and ripping his heart out of his chest, and then, her eyes flicker black, and he realizes what he's dealing with, so runs to, secret weapons room, which, want those.
I agreed.
He tries, throwing a knife at her, it doesn't work, and then he dies. Which, especially in the earlier days, Supernatural liked to push the envelope to see what they could get away with, which they really pushed, I think, up into season 4 or 5 when they murdered a whole room of nuns.
Oh yeah.
That was a big one where they're just let's see if we can do it. But they start here where they're just killing the pastor inside a church. Anyways, we cut back to Manning, Colorado, where John is catching Sam and Dean up on kind of everything involved with this demon, what he knows, what he thinks they're dealing with, what they're up against. A little bit of how he's been tracking it, which threw me off a little bit because after watching the whole series and everything, the demon in this instance has been finding more children at their 6 months day. Yeah. Once they're exactly 6 months old, and there's been more houses burning down, women presumably burning on the ceiling, stuff like that. And as we find out later, that wasn't entirely common. It was just if he was interrupted while doing his demon-y thing. And also it was in order to prep soldiers for a war that was going to be starting soon. So did he think maybe these guys won't work and I'll have to try it again in 18, 20 years?
Or he's trying to throw him off the scent.
I mean, couldn't he have thrown him off the scent by just not doing anything?
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. I'm sure they address it at some point because, I every time I have an issue with something, there's some sort of line somewhere. So that just
corrects itself.
Yeah, well, updates later maybe? I don't know. As they're learning about all of the things with the demon, and that the demon's been doing this again. There's been some signs in Salvation, Iowa. So they're heading to Salvation, Iowa, which is when John learns about Pastor Jim being killed from his friend Caleb. So we get that little connection, and so at this point they're going to split up. They're going to check different hospitals and stuff, and they're trying to find any kids that have been born roughly 6 months ago so they can try to narrow down where this demon might be attacking next. So in this instance, we get Dean talking to a receptionist at one of the hospitals. The receptionist is played by Serinda Swan, who we see come back later in season 6 as the Veritas. So that's the Truth episode.
Could she have been the Veritas the entire time? Like just a headcanon?
Yeah, could have been. Because I think she's like a talk show host or something.
Yeah.
As her alias. And so, I mean, she could have just been playing as different forms and could have been just playing as, I wanted to say hotel receptionist, but hospital receptionist. Very expensive hotel. And,
where few people are well.
Yeah. And they all speak the truth. And they were just so focused on the demon, they didn't realize that was going on, maybe. So, yeah.
Okay.
Potentials. While this is going on, Sam starts having another vision, and it leads him to this area, and he runs into Monica Holt. Anyways, Monica was played by Erin Karpluk. By Erin.
I mean, you already prefaced it at the end of like the beginning of last episode. It's like, if I'm gonna get names wrong, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but what if they didn't watch that episode?
You'd hope that they'd be watching them in order.
You would hope so, but I've also watched videos on YouTube, and I know how that goes. You just see one, you're like, oh yeah, this is a good one.
Oh, it's good.
Anyways, Monica was played by Erin Karpluk. Again, if I mess up your name, I'm sorry. Who we see come back as Robin later on in the season 9 episode where Dean is helping out Sonny at the boys' home.
Oh yeah.
That's where he ran away and ended up at this boys' home for a while, and kind of had like an actual like normal family type experience. And I don't remember right off the top of my hand. I don't remember right off the top of my hand who Robin is.
That's where you write all the notes.
Yeah. But after we do the season finale, we're planning on doing just like an episode specifically of all the reoccurring actors. So as I get like the videos of this, I go in and I kind of rewatch the episode a little bit. So by the time we get to there, I should remember who Robin is. So stay tuned. Anyways, Sam kind of meets Monica and verifies that her daughter is going to be turning 6 months today, and has some more visions of bad things going to happen. So kind of know, they're on the right track. We go back to the hotel where everyone's at, and John learns about Sam having visions, and he's not happy about it. And Dean actually like stands up to him at this point, because he's like, stuff like this happens, you call me. He's like, call you? Like, we tried call you. I called you for all these. Sam called you when I was dying. Like, I got a better chance of winning the lottery than getting you on the phone. John's like, don't like your tone, but you're right. Like, you've got a point. And
like John's one of those, like, he like had all the best intentions, but he's still kind of a jackass.
Well, and as we learn throughout the rest of the series, like anybody that has known John, everyone is like, I haven't talked to John for however long, tell him to come back around. I won't even point a shotgun at him this time.
Yeah.
Like, you get that from multiple people where they're just like, I'm not talking to John Winchester anymore.
Yep. He's a bit abrasive.
Yeah. So, anyways, Sam then gets a call from Meg, who wants to talk to John.
Shut up, Meg.
Yeah. Sam tries to play off, I don't know where my dad is, and he's like, give me the phone, like she knows. And then Meg is now with Caleb.
Uh-oh.
And she wants the Colt. He was like, Colt.
Look,
it is difficult to enunciate that O.
Don't you look at me with judgmental eyes next time.
I wasn't judging. Anyways, Meg wants the gun that they got in the last episode. And, John's trying to play it off. I don't have it. And she's just like, oh, well, listen to this. And then slices Caleb's throat. and is basically saying that she's going to hunt down anyone that has ever helped them and just kill them unless he shows up in Lincoln, Nebraska to give her the gun. And he's saying he's going to need a day or two because, he's got to get over there. He can't just hop on a plane with a gun, which you could check it, but anyone wouldn't do that. Also, maybe he's just trying to play off that she doesn't know where they are, which presumably she doesn't, because I looked it up, and as far away as you can get in Iowa, because Salvation is not a real city, it would only take 5 hours or so to drive to Lincoln, Nebraska.
But yeah, they could be playing it off like I'm in Maine right now.
Right.
It's going to take a day or two.
So he definitely could have gotten there by midnight. Anyways, she wants him to meet her at this warehouse on the corner of Wabash and Lake, which was something that struck me when I heard it, because I was like, that sounds really familiar. Well, in The Matrix, when Neo is running from Smith at the end, and he steals that guy's phone, he's like, Mr. Wizard, get me out of here. He's like, oh, we got an old exit for you on Wabash and Lake.
Oh.
Mr. Wizard, get me the hell out of here.
Got a patch on an old exit, Wabash and Lake.
Which could be some foreshadowing, because when Neo gets to Wabash and Lake, he gets shot in the chest. So maybe foreshadowing that this isn't going to work out the way that John thinks it is. Anyways, he's gonna go, but what he's gonna do is he's gonna take a fake gun with him and try to pass it off as the actual Colt. And he's gonna leave Sam and Dean to deal with the demon. He doesn't want to, but hands are kind of tied, so they're gonna do what they gotta do.
Yep.
We also learned that the Colt has special bullets, and there's only 4 left. So use your shots wisely. So they can go their own way. Go their own way. Again. So we now have the separate shots. We get John, he's kind of like checking out the area where he's supposed to be meeting with Meg, and you see him trying to set up some stuff. He's checking out escape routes, and we get Sam and Dean, they're sitting outside of Monica's house. They're just kind of keeping an eye on things. We cut back, we see, John doing some incantation and dropping across into, like, a water tower thing. It's not really a tower, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, big old tankard of water.
It's this thing right here.
Yeah.
We get Meg showing up. John meets up with Meg, but she didn't come alone. And it's a trap! But he knew it was a trap, so he passes the gun off, and Meg hands it to the guy whose name I cannot remember at the moment. He's not important. He won't last long. And
Demon number 1, we will call him.
For now. And so the guy then shoots Meg with the gun, and she's not happy about being shot, but then realizes that it's a fake, and John's trying to pass it off like, I've never shot it before. How would I know? And she was like, I'm not in the mood right now. I've been shot. And he was like, well, you should be glad it wasn't the real Colt then. Really funny. And so they're getting ready to kill John. He goes to make his escape. And he uses he basically turned that whole thing of water into holy water. And he uses that as his own trap to make his escape. Which, like, when I saw that, I was like, what are the rules to making holy water? Like, can you just go to the oceans and just make all the oceans holy water, and then when they evaporate, and then did somebody literally bless the rains down in Africa? Are there no monsters in Africa because it's holy rain that's coming down?
Turns out all of Toto is basically just a bunch of hunters, and they're trying to give a hint to everyone. It's like, hey, by the way, this is a safe spot to be. All of Africa's good.
Yeah. Anyways, we cut back to Sam and Dean. They're talking and everything. All of a sudden, there's static on the radio. The lights are flickering. They're like, the demon's there, let's go. So they sneak into the house, and they get attacked by a human. Because, Monica's married, and turns out her husband doesn't take kindly to people breaking into their house. So it's part of, like, trying to fend off being attacked, but also not hurt him because they're trying to help.
The dude's just doing what's natural to anybody who catches someone breaking in, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like, trying to protect his family. He's not a monster.
No. So, they try to tell Monica to stay out of the kid's room, but the guy's like, no, go grab the kid. And so Sam runs in to help, because at this point she went in, there's a demon in there. She is now up on the ceiling. So I wrote in my notes, Sam tries to shoot demon and missed. Yep, that's pretty great.
All right, guys, that's the episode. Tune in next week as we talk about...
So they get everybody out of the house. We cut back to John as he's trying to escape. His truck has flat tires. He's trying different things to get away, and he's suddenly flung up against a wall, and bad things are going to happen. Then we get back to Sam and Dean. Dean won't let Sam run into a burning building. We get later at the hotel, they're arguing about it, and Dean's not going to let Sam kill himself over this thing, and Sam's not happy, but eventually he calms down and is like, okay, you're right, like, Dad should have called by now, like, try him again. Dean tries to get a hold of John again, and then Meg answers, and then, they realize bad things have happened, and this is our first episode that is actually to be continued. So, tune in next time to find out what happens. But what about enchanted weapons here?
So last episode, I do want to address this really quick, is last episode I said we would be talking about devil's traps. Well, that's because I got my episode swapped around just a wee bit.
It happens.
And I thought that this, because of the to be continued, I see this episode and then the next episode is almost sometimes melding together.
Right.
And I forget that there are actually 2 episodes. So no, we're not talking about devil's traps. That's going to be next episode. But instead we're going to be looking at the cult and enchanted weapons. Obviously the cult is built in such a way that it can kill, it said everything, but we later learned that it can kill just about everything. There are certain very special things that it cannot kill, which got me kind of thinking about what enchanted weapons looked like in mythology and how the heck you make them, especially since it's very, Supernatural's very coy. Are you all right?
It's debatable.
Supernatural's very coy about how the cult was actually made. And there's a lot of different ways to go about making them, but I mean, even in the mythologies, it's very much, sometimes they're passed down. If you look at one of the most famous examples of an enchanted weapon, you've got the Lady of the Lake passing down Excalibur to King Arthur. The sword in the stone was not actually Excalibur. That was a sword that was just stuck in the stone in order to figure out who was going to be the actual king. Whereas Excalibur was given to King Arthur by the Lady of the Lake, which was an enchanted weapon. It was incredibly powerful and was able to unite all of England for a brief period of time. And then when Arthur died at Mordred's hand, the Excalibur was actually hurled back into the lake and reclaimed by the Lady of the Lake. But that one was more of just being passed down. In our earlier episode, talking about the Vanir and Freyr, Freyr also had an enchanted sword that would have been actually built. This one was crafted by the Dwarven kingdoms and could fight all on its own. So he didn't actually need to be. So he didn't actually need to be using it. And in the mythologies, it was predicted that he would eventually lose this enchanted sword, and this would be without the enchanted sword. That was what doomed him when fighting the fire giant Surtur. And he decided to get rid of his enchanted sword in order so he could marry a giantess. He ends up trading it away so that he can marry her.
Okay.
And by not having it, he's now doomed the world to going up in flames.
Is that the guy from Ragnarok?
Yeah, he was the one that we were talking about with Surtur, is that fire giant from Ragnarok, the Thor movie at least. So, which is true, which was actually in Norse mythology. He would be the one that would eventually drive his sword into the ground and turn the entire world and set Yggdrasil aflame. So some magic weapons are given, some of them are built, but what exactly constitutes an enchanted weapon or a magic weapon? Well, if you look at it historically in weapon forging, because we have a lot of magic weapons throughout history. Almost every hero has had some sort of a magical weapon or enchanted weapon or a weapon that seems to be blessed to do battle against their enemies. In the later episode, when we're talking about the Devil's Trap, and we'll get into this more, the Seal of Solomon, which is what the Devil's Trap is based on, is actually engraved on a ring and is considered a weapon to control and fight against demons, and so which is bestowed by God. So that's another type of weapon in that history. But what exactly constitutes, or what was an inspiration for a magical weapon? And that has been kind of traced back to early smithing habits. So if you look at the Iron Age, we would have, you would have these very strong, sharp swords, but oftentimes they might get stuck in a shield. As you're going back and forth, iron doesn't bend very well. Iron is very hard and it's brittle, and it's sometimes more likely to break than it is to actually bend.
Fair.
But then during that time, especially if you're looking at what are known as Guthract swords, Guthract are Norse swords that are considered to be very, very, very well made and are considered to be magical swords. What makes them magic is that they're not iron, they're steel. So what would end up happening is you have these swords on the battlefield, and as smiths were experimenting and trying to figure these things out, there's some places that are saying, like, in order to make a proper Guthract sword, or to make it a magical sword, you must bathe it in the blood of your enemies, or you must quench it in holy water, or quench it in blood. When in reality, it's actually about adding a certain amount of carbon to your iron as you're working it, and thus making it steel. Well, steel is much more flexible. It still holds a solid edge, but what would end up happening is you'd be out on a battlefield, you would have an Guthract or steel sword, and it gets stuck in a shield, say that you stab it into your opponent's shield, and the opponent starts moving the shield to try and break your sword, and instead of breaking, your sword bends. And as your sword bends and then bounces back into place, still maintaining its edge, that you've got yourself a magical sword. And so you have these swords that were they still hold their edge, they were still able to do all this, and they wouldn't break. They would only bend and then immediately pop back into place, or just require a little bit of bending it back in order to maintain its shape. That would have been considered a magical item. That would have been, and they were even looked at it that way. They were looked at being a very special magical item.
So what you're saying is the real magic was in here all along.
No, it was carbon. The real magic was in carbon all along.
Gotcha. Well, aren't we carbon-based life forms?
Well, I guess
the real magic is in here all along.
In here all along. I mean, you're not wrong. We are carbon-based life forms, so in that, yeah, we are magical, aren't we?
Yeah.
So that would later just start to kind of show up throughout the rest of mythologies, but there's also something to be said about being able to slay the unslayable in a certain way that truly sets a hero apart from the everyday man. Okay. But sometimes the hero is not necessarily just looked at within their characteristics, but rather looked at the equipment that they're able to use, because the equipment is something that can be revered and even passed down in order to make heroes of another generation. But as for actually creating it, I mean, you've got stuff like holy water, which could be considered a magical weapon or enchanted weapon against things like demons, and how you would go about making that. And there's a lot of different ways to make that. And Supernatural kind of has their own way of doing it. But even in Supernatural, we're going to see more enchanted weapons. Later on in the series, we're going to have a magic sword that's supposed to be strong against dragons. Later on in the seasons, we're actually going to see Mjolnir, the magical hammer of Thor. So I mean, Supernatural is just kind of dipping its toes into it, but I also love that normally we look at magic weapons and they're swords. Swords were considered, to be it would show royalty, because swords were very expensive to make. They were very expensive to have. Oftentimes, as a peasant, you'd either be using a weapon that had started off as a peasant weapon, such as a flail or maybe even an axe, or you'd get like a sharp pointy stick, or later on a spear. But looking at royalty, they were the ones who got to wield the swords on the battlefield. If you walked out onto a battlefield and you saw someone swinging around a sword, you knew that was someone that's been trained.
It's magical.
It's magical. Well, you would hope it wasn't magical. You'd hope it's one of those that if it got stuck in your shield, it would break. If it suddenly bent, you'd be like,
side they're on.
That's true. That's a fair point, too. It's like, I hope he has a magic sword. But oftentimes the Uthbert were actually sketched or etched with Uthbert into the side of the blade. And so that would be denotating that this is the magical sword, and this was the sword that would, be able to bring your group, your tribe, your army to victory.
That vaguely reminds me of the Wheel of Time series. I've been reading through the books, and they have what they call heron marked blades. And if you have a blade with a heron on it, that denotes a blade master. So just by seeing someone's sword, you could tell they know what they're doing. So it kind of reminds me of that. They see it with that etch on there. He's got the magic sword.
Well, there was a fantasy book series a while back. I'm blanking out on the author right now, but it was called The Book of Swords, and it actually was following 12 different swords that had been forged by Vulcan. In the real world, Vulcan was the Roman god of the Roman god of smithing. In their universe, he was another god of smithing, and he actually ends up.
So it wasn't this Vulcan?
No, it wasn't this Vulcan.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. So it wasn't this Vulcan, but rather, and not even this Vulcan. It was just a completely different Vulcan.
Okay.
But he
I'm
uses.
guessing you're going to find all those pictures then?
I sure am.
Okay.
He essentially ends up killing 12 mortals, and that is what he uses in order to create his magical swords. But
Murder?
going back. Huh?
He uses murder to create magical swords?
He uses murder to create magical swords.
Just making sure I'm on the same page.
But going back to what I was saying about supernaturals, normally we have swords are considered the magical weapons without mythology, and they've now kind of decided to start adding to it, and now we've got a magical gun on our side, because now we're starting to look at more modern day times, and it's going to be a lot easier to go after a demon with a magical gun than it is probably going to be with a magical sword. You don't want to necessarily engage in hand-to-hand combat with a magical sword with a demon, but then Ruby comes along and proves us wrong.
Well, and also the way it's set up as well is, it's limited. There's only 4 shots left.
So it kind of begs the question, are the bullets magical? Is the Colt itself magical? Or do they have to work together in order for the magic to happen?
It is a fair question, because Bobby is able to make it work with just whatever bullets later on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
Is the Colt magical, the bullets magical, or is the real magic all the friends we made along the way?
That's what I was thinking of earlier.
Although I do want that magical Colt, not because it could kill anything, but just because I think it'd be cool to have.
I've tried looking up replicas, but I have not been able to find any when I have looked. I'm sure there's still some somewhere.
Yeah, floating around somewhere.
Yeah, but you would think someone would just be producing a lot of just replicas of that. Whether or not they're even real, even plastic or rubber or something.
Yeah. Well, I think they said in some of the behind the scenes that some of the Colts were actually rubber, just so they could do pistol whipping and things like that. Which is a type of magic, I would guess. It's hey, it's a Colt that causes no damage when you hit someone with it. So next week we are looking at the Devil's Trap and the Seal of Solomon, because we get to deal with more demons. Yay!
And it's season 1, season finale.
It is. We made it through our first season. Well, next week we will have made it through our next season.
Yeah. And then after that, we're planning on doing a recap of all of the reoccurring actors through season 1.
That is going to be fun, because there's just from the last couple of episodes alone, it's that's going to be a trek.
But it'll give us a chance to focus a little bit more on who they played in each one, and give me more time to look into, so we don't have to math our way through whether or not the headcanon would be headcanon.
So yeah, I guess tune in next week.
Yeah. Until then, stay safe, buckle up, and
we got work to do.